to land our compliance officer, and maybe Alan will take this one.
This action item is regarding a settlement request that exceeds $25,000 and therefore requires board approval. This medical matter case relates to an automobile accident in 2010, and we're requesting a settlement approval in the amount of $47,500 in exchange for a full release and dismissal of Mr. Mather's claims. The automobile accident involved a PSTA bus that evidence shows ran a red light and injured Mr. Mather. And therefore, we're requesting approval of the settlement in the amount of $47,500.
Thank you. Any members of the public wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, is there a motion from the board?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Now we'll move on to informational items. Greenlight, Pinellas, bus plan scenarios. Sandra Borchers.
Morning.
Sandra Borchers, Chief Development Officer at PSTA. I have with me here today Marie Lewis and Russ Chisholm from TMD, and they'll be giving you a presentation on the community bus plan. I would like to remind you that you got an email this morning with a revised presentation, so that PDF is available to you right now, as well as the go-to meeting. This is an information item today, because this is about us really taking a look at the information that's presented. You will have an opportunity to approve the plan at your next meeting. So I hope you'll ask a lot of good questions today, and so we can take this through the Greenlight process. I'm sure you all know this by now, but the purpose of the community bus plan is to do better for our community and better for our economy, but also to engage the community in the conversation. In addition to that, we're creating phased plans that will respond to a variety of funding scenarios. So this means not only will we be looking at a new revenue scenario that looks at how that bus plan, that foundational bus plan, would be created out of the 1-cent sales tax, but also what is the plan B? What does a no new revenue scenario look like, and how do we prepare for that in the future? We have taken a lot of information that's been done already and built on that. This is a revision of what the alternative analysis looked at. Again, to add more detail to that bus network, but also integrate it with the purposeful Greenlight analysis plan. This is our schedule. We are on schedule, on target for a discussion today, and then a plan adoption at your next meeting. We also, as you know, have ongoing public coordination and communication with a variety of our partners across the county. Today, we're going to focus our attention on the new revenue scenario and the no new revenue scenario. As you remember from your April meeting, you saw the optimal scenario and agreed in concept of how that scenario was built, going from what we have today as a hub system to the grid system. The new revenue scenario was reviewed by the planning committee in June in a robust conversation, so there are some changes based on their conversation, as well as presentation to the ACPT and to the Greenlight Pinellas committees. But it does mirror those financial assumptions that you've all seen from the alternatives analysis. So again, we're working with those assumptions to see what kind of bus system that we can build within that 1-cent scenario. The no new revenue scenario, which the planning committee looked at in July, looks at, well, how does our next 10 years look if we do not have any changes in our revenue source. With that, I'll turn it over to Marie, and then she will present the new revenue scenario, followed by the opportunity to ask questions, and then the no new revenue scenario.
statistically back. So we're talking through first the new revenue scenario and then the no new revenue scenario. So with the new revenue scenario, we are talking about the plan that can be implemented with the passage of the referendum. And as Cassandra mentioned, we really built off of the alternatives analysis, and we took the bus network to the next level, making sure that the entire network worked for Pinellas, the near future and the extended future. So this is a chart that came out of the alternatives analysis, kind of showing the breakdown of revenue and funding for different pieces of the network, kind of that pot that would be available under the referendum scenario in terms of rail construction, operations, and also existing and expanded bus service. So we put together a little chart, a very basic chart, showing kind of how the funding stacks up within the non-fare revenue funding stacks up between kind of the existing scenario and under the referendum. And under the referendum, using the assumptions that came out of the AA, approximately how much would go to rail in the construction and operation phases, as well as how much would be available for bus. So the kind of key thing here is, while there is funding available for rail, there's also a significant amount additional for bus beyond what's available today. So as we talked about in April with the optimal plan, we talked about kind of going to a different overall structure for the bus network at PSTA. A lot of things, including greater frequency on core routes, including streamlined, optimized service, more direct service between origins and destinations, minimizing overlap, and of course, transforming the system from a hub to a grid network, where higher frequencies throughout the system would allow people to transfer quickly, more easily, kind of on the street rather than having to go into designated hubs like they do today. So we followed that design principle within the new revenue scenario because we are able to implement kind of the better frequencies that allow us to do something like this. So here is the new revenue scenario in all its glory in terms of when it's on the map. So within the new revenue scenario, it includes over 65% more service hours and miles than PSTA currently provides. And again, it is kind of based off of that network structure, the tiers, the interaction between the services that we discussed in the optimal plan. And it really does kind of integrate with and provide a foundation for rail service so that we make sure that we develop the network in tandem going forward. Of course, the bus network will kind of begin to come on sooner, begin to be implemented and used throughout the county as rail is being constructed. So these are the guiding principles that we used to develop the bus network new revenue scenario. First and foremost, increased frequencies on some of the most potent routes in the PSTA system to at least 15 minutes. 15 minutes or better on the core routes. So allow people to get around quickly, easily, conveniently, and begin to be a little more competitive with car travel. Create a grid network that works efficiently, doesn't require as many deviations. It's more efficient to operate, and it's also more convenient for the customer. Improved overall span of service, including evenings and weekends. When we talked with the public early on in the process, they said frequency and they said span of service. Those were the two big things. So to make sure we address those. So we kind of broke this down into showing, what does the service look like on a couple of different levels. So this we're calling kind of the frequent network. What routes, what areas in the county are going to have this 15-minute, this kind of spontaneous use on-demand service allows people to come out and catch a bus without having to consult the schedule. So we see that we really take this network through a lot of different areas in the county. It's not just on a few routes. It's got a significant presence throughout the county, including some of the core roads in the system as well as along the beaches. This also includes what we are calling our BRT or rapid corridors. Some of these major corridors, the core routes, the ones that show in red, that we want to really prioritize some improvements, some speed improvements, manage the vehicles, just kind of upgrade the transit experience. So this is an example of what something like that might look like. We kind of have a little rendering of 4th Street and a nice kind of enhanced bus. Maybe it has its own lane, it has a nice shelter, some real-time information. You know, it kind of starts to improve the streetscape, and it just, you know, kind of integrates well with the surrounding area. So we also have, supporting the frequent network, is an overall network of local, flexible trolley circulator services that connect into the frequent network and kind of provide a complete base of service throughout the county. We also have our regional network. This came up earlier today, and this is, you know, something that is a hallmark of this plan, is providing expanded and in many cases 7-day-a-week service across to Tampa as well as West Shore. So we have service from the South, Middle, and North County areas, across McMullen Booth, across Courtney Campbell, and across the 275, and they all provide a connection into West Shore as well as downtown Tampa, which is a destination that is currently not served. Evenings and weekends, we expanded the service band throughout the network. A little harder to show on a map, but we have the frequent network operating at least until midnight, Monday through Saturday. Supporting network at least until 10 p.m. And with the trolley services, we have kind of a different market there that may have a few different needs. Maybe want to stay out a little bit later at night. A tailored service band for those markets. But weekend service hours, we really wanted to improve the weekend network, and we increased weekend service hours by over 80%. So it's almost a doubling of the service that's out and available on weekends. So this is what the frequency of the new revenue scenario looks like. And the darker the line, the more frequent the route. So we have a pretty complete, robust network of frequent services running 15 minutes or better, supported by 30 and 60-minute services, and combined to create a complete network. So when we put those together, we look at PSTA today versus the new revenue scenario, we can kind of see how things have increased throughout the network. Before I move to the no new revenue scenario, are there any questions? That's it.
Well, I do have a question. Do you have some more detail that you can hand out, share with us later? As to,
What exactly is in these scenarios?
yes.
Yes, we will. We're going to follow up with a matrix of the different scenarios, what's included in them, a little more detail.
That detail answers some of this, but on that last slide where we showed the frequency was varying shades of blue.
I know, yeah.
How many routes, one of the goals was to get rid of the 60-minute service. How many routes still have 60-minute service under that?
It was about 5 routes that have 60-minute service. And that was basically to bring our annual totals in line with approximately what the alternatives analysis has spec'd out for available bus service. So if it turns out that things are a little bit different, of course the funding always never quite works out exactly as you figure. One of those things would be to not have 60-minute service in the network.
Okay. Can you say which routes those are?
Let's see, I think it's if I look at the map, it would be 62. The one thing I should preface it with is these routes are not exactly the same as they are today. We changed the structure of the network So if I'm saying one route, it's not exactly the same as what the route is today.
Could you go back to that slide?
This is this slide?
Can you, yeah, we're not.
Oh, you're not seeing it.
No.
There we go. It was, I think it was the 62, the 11, the 38, the 21, and the 68.
Okay, and those are just based on the lowest ridership?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
What, the AA, I think, assumed 46, 47% of the annual revenues from Pinellas go for bus service. What percentage are we assuming in this?
Sorry, what was that, Morgan?
The percentage of the annual revenues from this, the sales tax,
Uh-huh.
what percentage are we assuming is going for bus service versus rail?
For bus service or just non-rail?
Give me both numbers.
I think that the non-rail number was about 65%. However, then we have overhead administration, which isn't really, unique to one thing or another. So actual bus service, I'd have to double check on how much that is. If we can get out things like, overhead administration, some of the fixed costs, I have to check on that.
And you just asked on that chart, which came directly out of the alternative analysis, and is the approved financial assumptions. We haven't made any new assumptions other than that, other than the line that is referred to as light rail project operations, including maintenance, which is $19.1 million out of the sales tax.
What page are you looking at?
That one, it's, I don't know what page that is. The third line, $19.1 million, that's operating in the rate. So that would not begin right away. And so in the early years, approximately the first 10 years of revenue, that money we have assumed could be used for bus capital. Not necessarily bus operating, because it's money that will go away, or not be here perpetually, but can be used to make those bus traffic transit improvements or expand the bus fleet.
And how long are you assuming you can use those funds?
5 years? 5 years, so.
All right.
Any other questions?
Do you want the, what occurred with planning?
Yeah,
on
we'll
this?
finish the presentation with the non-new revenue scenarios.
Okay. So the new revenue scenario follows along PSTA's current track and their overall changes in the funding. So we want to look at current trends, how things are stacking up, and kind of make some decisions on where we might be in the future. We saw this map, the PSTA today, how it looks, 43 routes throughout the network, 2 routes operating at 15-minute headways. So with the financial assumptions that we use to develop the new revenue, we have costs growing at approximately 5.6% per year, and that was based on trends over the past 2 or 3 years, and how that stacked up and how that would carry into the future. However, we have non-fare revenues, funding revenues growing at approximately 1.3%. So not surprisingly, this creates a bit of a bow tie where costs grow faster than revenues, and we have to make decisions and changes in order to bring things in line. Within this overall financial assumption, we have fare increases assumed to occur approximately every 3 years. So in a situation like this, there are multiple strategies, quite a few that can exist to balance the budget. And we kind of chose one overall strategy to show here is a reduction in service in order to bring costs more in line with revenues, and kind of how that would look throughout the network. So this is a graph that I believe you've seen before, showing first we have the revenue line. This is out to 2025. And here we have the red is the cost line, which in that slope is approximately the rate of growth here. So if we were to, be out of line in the next few years, about a 15% cut would balance the budget in 2017. However, then, it would be still not enough to create, have enough revenue into the future. So a 28% reduction in service would allow the budget to be balanced through 2023, 10 years from now. So that is the scenario that we decided to show here. So within the network concept for a new revenue scenario, we did follow a lot of the structure of the optimal and the new revenue plan, because there were a lot of efficiencies that we did make when designing that network. And if we were going to go into a scenario where we needed to make changes or reductions, going to a more efficient network structure would make sense, because it would allow us to keep more out on the street in general with that kind of redesigned network structure. So that would be the responsible thing to do. So we did, a lot of those key guiding principles still make sense in a no revenue scenario, including, keeping as much frequency out on the strong routes as possible. Minimizing overlap, creating better frequency on a few routes than less frequency on more routes. One change that we did make is that, we couldn't go as far into a grid network with a lower frequency, a less revenue environment, because when we have lower frequency services connecting to each other, they really should be taking place at hubs rather than on the street, because people are going to have to wait longer. So we did have to reintroduce some of that back into the network to make something like this work. So again, we have an approximately 28% reduction in service that allows us to balance the budget through 2023. So we kind of looked at it in terms of two different possible strategies. What would happen if we focused our resources on the core routes? These are the routes with the highest ridership, highest productivity, highest fare box recovery. Or what would happen if we focused on maintaining the coverage that's out there today, but not being able to provide as much frequency? So one of the reasons we decided to show this is that, in our experience, maintaining good service on those core routes is really important for maintaining ridership and fare box recovery. Because those routes are kind of, you could say, the top performers in the system. And so when we keep the resources in those top performers, everything tends to work better. Of course, the trade-off is there isn't as much coverage in the system. So here are kind of the hallmarks of a core focus versus a coverage focused network. Where we prioritize frequency in the core focus. So we're able to create 6 routes on weekdays with 15-minute headways. However, we have to discontinue completely 10 routes. So that is quite a bit of coverage loss in the system. And also the weekend service is significantly reduced. 28% is a fairly large cut. In terms of the coverage focus, all the restructured routes are maintained, but we have no 15-minute service, and we don't even have that much 30-minute service. So there's a lot of 60-minute service out there in the network in order to get us, to maintain that amount of coverage in the system. So the coverage focus is more likely to require additional cuts in the future, because we're just kind of spreading the resources out evenly and not putting the resources in the services that have the greatest return. So here's what frequency maps may look like for a core versus coverage focus. A lot fewer lines on the core map, but a few darker lines. And in the coverage focus, we have just, kind of a little more homogeneous type of service throughout the network. So one of the things that we don't show on here is, weekend service. Within the coverage scenario, there is no Sunday service. It's gone in order to be able to maintain the 28% cut, and Saturday is reduced as well. So obviously, situations like this involve trade-offs, and again, this is just one of many possible outcomes in a no new revenue scenario. There are many decisions to make, And we are talking about, a scenario where we probably need to make these decisions around 2017 in order to balance the budget. But there are a lot of trade-offs in terms of coverage, frequency, span, weekend service, how do we make these choices? Those are all important decisions. And one thing is that, in a new revenue scenario, funding partnerships may become more important than ever in order to provide coverage that may be needed or desired. So the next steps here in the plan process are, as Cassandra mentioned, consider adoption of the community bus plan, the scenarios, the principles in August. We're going to continue refining the implementation and phasing plans and getting a little more down into the detail, making sure everything's laid out, and continuing the community dialogues in coordination with the overall Greenlight plan.
I apologize if you answered this, but under the new revenue, did that include going to the millage cap or staying at the current millage?
That's a good question. We didn't have any increased knowledge in the new revenue.
So there would still be that
A little bit.
small factor.
We were talking about that yesterday and how big a difference that would make. And there's a little bit more that could be gained there, I guess, but it wouldn't make a significant difference.
Okay. Commissioner Bozowski, Planning Commission, Planning Committee, all this? Part of that?
Yes, we, as someone mentioned earlier, we did review the new revenue scenario in June and the no new revenue scenario in July. And there were some changes on the new revenue scenario. Our feedback had been, just so you know, when we looked at the new revenue scenario, it was obviously different than the optimal that had all the bells and whistles. And a couple of things that we had noticed was that there wasn't a connection to Hillsborough from North County via Tampa Road, and we felt that that was important, and that was added in. The map, we kept talking about how the map itself looked so sparse in North County versus South County, and staff has done a great job in revamping that, showing, because there's a lot of property up there that's undevelopable because it's green space, and you didn't really see the 3/4 mile extension off the routes for the connector, so it looks much better, as well as there wasn't, and I don't remember exactly, but there wasn't a good amount of service on the Mullen booth, or it wasn't there at all, and some of that got adjusted and added back in. So those were some of the main changes that we talked about with the new revenue scenario, but with those changes, we supported it unanimously. As far as the no new revenue service, we had some discussion on the revenue and expense assumptions. No decisions were made, but there was a little concern that there was a big gap there between 5-something% increase in expenses and only 1.2 in revenues. And we thought maybe we could sharpen our pen a little bit on that. But then in looking at the no new revenue service, there's the two things that they've just explained. A focus going more towards the core, which is getting closer to a grid, or a focus on overall coverage. And our discussion was unanimous in our recommendation, even though there's no decision today, is that we felt going towards the core was the better route, maybe not literally, but that using that as sort of the guiding principle was the better way to go. And our reasoning was that, we did this bus study in the premise of saying, if we were going to blow up the system, what will it look like? And what we've been told over and over is that the grid system is the way to go, is the frequency, being able to walk to the street and get on a bus and have that sort of burned in people's brains that that's available is the way to go. And the efficiency of like I always like to say, take your grandmother's bus stops out of there that have been put in over the years. It's a way to improve the system even without the new revenue, and it's also a way to build confidence with the folks out there that may not feel we're running an efficient operation. It gets us closer to that, so that if future options of penny or whatever revenue come, we have taken that time to build the confidence in the public. So that was a unanimous recommendation to lean towards the core versus the coverage, because the coverage is more or less basically what we're doing now.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
I'd like to go back, if I could, to the chart where you showed the cost growing at 5.6% and the non-fair revenue growing by 1.3%. And just you said non-fair revenue. If you included fare increases every 3 years, as you mentioned, would that get us, what would that get us up to as far as revenue?
It would make a difference, but every time we increase fares, we also have a ridership elasticity built into the model, which reduces the ridership somewhat, because every time you do increase fares, you do decrease ridership. You do end up with more fare revenue at the end, but it's not the same as keeping all your riders and just adding on additional fares. So that's a good question. I mean, I think that, there may be the possibility to, enhance that by, but it kind of like going to the millage rate, it may make a difference, but it's, it's pretty small in the overall scheme of things.
Last week, I think we had a number of 4% for cost growth per year and revenue increase of 1.6, which is not really very much different than what you said this morning. I'm just concerned that even if that happens, we're going to be in a disaster in another 6 years. And I'm struggling with how we can come up with a decision related to the options on coverage and focus when we don't have a sustainable system. And so that's my first concern, and I have that concern as far as moving forward to any adoption. We need to deal with that as a base. Another question was on page 26, where the question is, on the coverage, you said there would be additional cuts in the future, whereas on the core system, it did not say there would be cuts in the future. And I'm wondering, why with the overall situation, why does the one seem to work and the other one not seem to work?
Sure. You're right about the cost curves. If they don't change, we're going to continue to have, the same problems. That's definitely the case. And even with, a 28% cut, if the cost curves don't change, either scenario may require additional cuts in the future. However, when we just talk about service and what service works and maintains ridership versus, what type of service, tends to lose ridership over time, putting good frequency on your core routes provides a better return on investment. You carry more riders because, you're putting good frequencies in markets where people are riding, whether, bigger population employment densities, more uses, things like that, and therefore you're going to return a higher fare box revenue. Whereas if you keep all your service out, regardless of whether it works well, regardless of whether it doesn't work well in terms of productivity and return on investment, it's a pretty straightforward business strategy of, putting money into the returns versus just, putting money out regardless of returns. So the fare box revenue is what we're really getting at here in terms of the financial sustainability of the system.
So what you're saying is that the financial sustainability with the focus is not guaranteed,
Right.
but it's higher than in the coverage model.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And I think the other thing that I mentioned before was having a summary of this and being able to drive down through it and having the charts available that we can look at and kind of digest would help us, and I'm glad we don't have to make that decision today.
Thank you, Sam, and a clarifying comment.
I just wanted to mention, and I think Councilman Johnson said it well, you know, the decision isn't before you today how the system gets cut. It's the severity of the cut that I think that needs to be considered. The truth of how we actually cut in the future is the core, from a purely number standpoint, looks good right now. The coverage, it will be difficult to explain to people why they're losing their bus route when it comes down to actually doing it. So I don't envy the board of 2017 of deciding, you know, how to do it. That is not a decision that you all have to make today, but it's a decision that I think it would be good to prepare for.
I'm glad you went first, because that really frames it. 28% cut is a 28% cut, and there's no way to make that something this community should accept. So it just makes the whole Greenlight initiative that more important for us to communicate that. Under your coverage focus, you talk about all restructured routes are maintained. So there is an initial restructuring of all the routes, and when does that happen?
I think that we would suggest doing that a little bit later. We would start to look at restructuring the routes maybe in 2015.
Okay. And I won't dwell on this since this is just a scenario that hopefully never comes into play. But if we do, and you kind of hit on it, Cassandra, if we do move towards a core focus, and I'm sure the planning committee talked about this, we've got to be very careful in doing that, because a lot of folks are dependent on our buses to get to work and the doctor and everywhere else. So let's just hope it doesn't come to that. That's a quote from the ALS movie. On your budget plan graph that Mr. Johnson referred to, you're saying the 28% cut takes us to 2023, but I'm looking at the dotted line and the revenue line, and they cross in 2021. So are we spending reserves for the last 2 years, or what gets us to 2023?
This would be, we would say, this is what the system looks like in the future, regardless of what we do. And say, in order to maintain the service for people to use, because every time you change something, people, it changes their life, it changes how they get to work, it changes a lot of things. And the fewer times that we can go back to the public and say, we're making another change, we're making another cut, you know, the better it is in just providing service in general. And so, but the recommendation is to take a larger cut up front and do what we have been doing, is build up the reserve so that we can maintain the service level for a longer period of time.
So that takes us through the end of 2023.
Right, and that allows, yes, with reserves. So you cut deeper, you build reserves, and then Greenlight.
Can you pull that slide up?
Oh, it is up, yeah.
It wasn't on the page. Okay, so even though the revenue line intersects with 2021, for those next 2 years, we're spending reserves until we get to the red arrows.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Dyson.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of reiterate what has been said. When we were in the planning committee and looking at the possibility of core versus coverage, one of the things that stood out very starkly was that under the core system, we're going to be moving more people. And quite simply, that's what our mission is. And that's one of the reasons that we thought that the core system would be preferable.
Mr. Barkley.
Yeah, I just wanted to double check with regard to any fare increase or any service reduction that obviously translates to further ridership loss, and so we have sort of a downward spiral every time we do that. And I just want to make sure that the methodology that we're using is adequately going to take into account the basically acceleration of ridership loss, et cetera, so that in effect those lines may be more optimistic than they would actually be.
Well, I would say that there is, as Marie mentioned, elasticity to fare increases, and it's Kurt Simpson model, and every time you raise fares by about 10%, your ridership drops by 3%. So, but then it just, and then it would build back up over time. It rarely stays at that lower level, but it's like buying meat. The price of meat goes up, people say, oh, I'm not going to buy it for a while, and then they say, oh, okay, I'll buy it again, because I miss it, So and so they might change their habits for a while. They will go back, but may not buy as much.
Okay, so historically, that's been what's happened every time we've had either a reduction in service or a fare increase.
Yes, that's a national model.
Yeah, but it's a good point overall is to not, with any service decisions in any revenue scenario, it's never a good idea to ignore the importance of fare revenue, and, having services to generate that gives you extra money to spend.
Thank you. Councilmember Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You touched on the, and that was a good segue, on the fare revenue. And we just had I think I know they said a 0.73 or something like that. Is it factored in with the potential increase in property values and the fare revenue? Is that factored into the no revenue scenario? No new revenue scenario? You have two scenarios. You have one with new revenue and one with no new revenue. My question is the fare box rates, because we have record ridership, and the increasing or potentially increasing property value base, is that factored into the no new revenue? What is I know the core, you're talking about a core system, the no new revenue. What is the effect? I know would be the cause of it, no new revenue, you have to go to core. What would be the effect? How many people would be affected? Jobs, routes, buses, getting around the city?
Well, in terms of overall coverage, there definitely be a fact. We had in here that of the restructured system, which already, is more efficient, includes a little bit less coverage than what PSTA has to pay. 10 more routes would be discontinued. Some of those routes are longer than others, but, there would be a significant amount of people who would no longer be near service. So that's where we, Senator was talking about the difficulties of, yes, technically, going to a core focus makes sense from the mobility and from the fare box revenue standpoint, but there are going to be a lot of people who are probably going to, come up and, be severe, say, hey, I'm losing all my service, so, yeah.
That's when a board member has been on the board for a while, when he starts thinking like staff. That's exactly the question that I got from Ross Silvers a couple days ago, and we'll be looking into that.
See, not just that, we're talking about buses. What about the other services that we offer? The no new revenue, are they going to be cut off? So you got the ride we do for the people that can't get to the buses.
That's exactly what Ross was asking in terms of the DART service.
And we also
that could potentially be an issue.
And we also just launched a new service in North County. That goes over to, connects over to Hillsborough.
That connector service would be maintained.
So that would be affected in the new revenue scenario. Yeah, I'm just curious as to that, and also, lastly, is that message being communicated as we go out and talk about Greenlight Pinellas, showing the people the alternative? I mean, this is gonna happen either way. So, I mean, is that being communicated, or we're just saying, you know, that we're pushing a robust, scalable transit system? Or is we showing them that the status quo or no additional revenue unless we get a millage cap increase from Tallahassee, which is probably not gonna happen. This is what we're gonna look like.
Yes, we're discussing that.
Now, see, the reason I ask that, because you know, at the each meeting, I always read about the drivers that got accommodations and all that, and thank them for being there for the riders, which are their customers, and also the employee being the face of PSTA. This is the only transportation these people have. So we talk about cutting 10 routes and getting rid of, and put you back on buses. If you cut 10 routes, I guess you're gonna need 10 bus drivers. Is that a fair assessment?
What more than that?
More than 10 bus drivers, okay. I'm just saying, that's why I asked you that question, because people talking bus, but it's an effect to going to a core system also, not just the routes.
And either coverage or core scenario, we have fewer bus drivers.
But if you actually go out and they do the Greenlight Pinellas, if you make that more real, more personal, and put people and jobs in the way these people depend on these routes to get around, I think it becomes quite obvious what has to be done. Thank you.
Mr. Long.
I just wanted to focus on the fact that I think it's important that we be careful about our messaging with regarding to this conversation that we're having right now. Excuse me, because, you know, there's a lot of new businesses that are coming into Pinellas County, and economically reducing our public transportation options is not a good thing when you start thinking about the economics of our county and our future. So while I appreciate very much developing an alternative plan for the what-ifs, I'd like to see our focus really on the future of where we want this to go, just for whatever that's worth. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I think that's a good point to touch on. This is going to be the complete study that we have been engaged with. Marie and Russ there from Transportation Management Design is finishing up, is finished in large part. They're still going to work on a phasing plan for us. But this will be on your agenda for consideration for approval of the entire, which once was known as the Community Bus Plan, which we're changing its name to the Greenlight Bus Plan. And it will be specifically all three scenarios. This no new scenario, which we've kind of focused on, was requested by a commissioner who's not here today to be included in the study. And so it was a plan B if the referendum were not to be approved. But when you take your vote next month, and the way this moves forward is the Greenlight plan is the new revenue scenario. It is the substantially expanded bus service. So that is part of our messaging. We do have this plan B worked out. I think why I would recommend approving of all of the scenarios, including this no new revenue scenario, is it speaks to something that I know Commissioner Bajowski has talked about, that no matter what we do, we want to have the most efficient system we can possibly operate, and whatever revenues we have available. And so even if we have to go through that 28% cut scenario, which nobody, including our riders, thousands of riders, and possibly more than 100 employees, would want to go through, we want to make sure that we have the most efficient system. We owe it to keep working on that. Another question that came up, or comment came up, I think, at the planning meeting, was that we are using this strategy of building up reserves to balance our budget. Obviously, that's not a ongoing sustainable strategy that Mr. Johnson mentioned. And so the idea of cutting 28% to build up reserves and give us time is either to look at, to change our revenue stream again, or to dramatically adjust our cost model of the organization, change that red line somehow. And that is going to be very, very difficult. That red line, I've been trying with Mike over the last month to move that red line down. And with our labor agreements and et cetera, it's just going to be a dramatic change to the way PSTA has been run. Well, and that's why that use of reserves, building up of reserves, will give the board the time that it will need to make those changes. But again, so next month, be ready to consider approving all of the scenarios, all of the plans. And then as we move forward through the Greenlight process, obviously probably our messaging is going to be most about the new enhanced services that can be implemented.
Mr. Walsh.
Question on the no new revenue scenario. Has the planning committee or anyone talked about other options, including raising the millage, including the 5 communities who now don't participate in ad valorem, those kind of legislative initiatives?
No.
No, and those are all options,
Right.
you know, that can help the situation, along with sharpening the pencil on what we're projecting our revenue and that big gap of revenue versus expenses. We couldn't get into that depth because,
Well, I just think that is,
you know, but those are all
options.
options.
Yeah, along with fare increases.
Right.
Did you have any kind of a ceiling on fare increases, or what were we looking at every 3 years?
Yeah, I'll have to double check on that. It was not a very large increase every 3 years. It was probably, a quarter, that makes sense, because 3 years is, you know, not too long of a time period, so we just want to do significant increases.
If I may, you know, I just want to again remind you that this is, for lack of a better term, this is a vision of where we could be given the current situation, regardless of how we sharpen the pencil. That being said, all of those variables that could go into play to change how those lines come closer together, we can do. Every single one of them takes a little bit of time, a little bit of effort, and the board may want to have those discussions in the future in terms of the variables as a group or the variables as individual, but it's going to be a long, tough decision to weigh the potential variables that you could put into the model and then the outcome.
And if I
It's
could
not just pushing the button.
add to that, I think it really, like what you said, it was just more of a vision versus going closer into the details. So I think next month, when we do go for this approval, and whatever the motion is stated or whatever, I think, or however it's presented, the no new, just like we don't know the specifics of the routes and all of that stuff with the new revenue. I mean, we have a general idea. We don't know the specifics of stops and that kind of thing. The no new revenue scenario, we don't know the specifics. So I think it's going to be important for us to just, it's a vision of where it could go versus somebody coming back and saying, well, you approved this plan. It's not a complete plan.
Well,
and everything you just mentioned, Commissioner Welch, all has to be considered if we go
Yeah,
there.
and I'm just saying it should be noted
Yes.
somewhere that those are options that the 2017 board.
I think you're
Absolutely.
absolutely correct in saying that.
Yes, but understanding, just like everything else, if the assumptions change, that 2023 vision that we showed you could happen in 2021, or it could happen in 2028, depending on factors within our control and those without our control, like healthcare costs or fuel prices and things like that.
Councilman Newton.
Yes, Commissioner West brings up a good question. The plan that we have, the I guess the 5 municipalities that currently don't participate, is it scalable to bring them in? The bus plan wasn't designed to service the areas too.
That's a whole other policy discussion that I don't think that I want to talk about today.
Well, the reason- The reason I'm asking about that, if you go forward and the referendum successful, we move away from Avalon base, okay, and they don't participate in Avalon anyway, but now they're going to be paying taxes on spending, would they be part of the system now?
Yes, and some of them are part of the system in contract with us, so they are paying, but they're paying a little bit differently out of their general fund. So, say some don't get service, but some do contract with us.
No, I'm just curious, because I mean, at that point, it wouldn't be about Avalon, so it'd be about taxes, and everybody would pay it, depending, so I'm wondering, my question is,
That's why.
would the system be adaptable to accommodate, you know, at that point?
They're included, right?
They're included in the new revenue scenario, yes.
Well, I know, but do we go around and do, you know, workshops and transit studies and have somebody on routes and all that? Probably not if we're going to service them. I know we can go out there. So my question is, when if this is, right now, it's because, I guess the reason they don't pay the Avalon into the PSTA, so they get limited service or they buy service. Okay, now, my question now is, if we lose away from the Avalon to a penny, there's no Avalon in the question anymore, so they're not excluded because they don't pay Avalon, they're all paying penny now. So would their area be adaptable until this plan? That's all, that's what I'm asking.
Yes.
Yes, yes. And in many cases, you know, the routes run through those areas, they may not stop. But instead of having a totally restructured system, it's actually less costly, just actually add access.
See, it solved another problem that we currently hear. Why buses don't go out there, why buses don't go here? That would kill all that, I think, because everybody's paying tax. Thank you.
Ms. Rice.
My question is about the core focus plan, and something that I think I heard in the planning committee meeting, and I'm not sure if I've heard it here yet, is there's basically very few cities that have chosen a core focus plan when faced with what I call the Sophie's choice of going with core focus versus coverage. And it was actually one city in the country that chose the core focus plan. Am I correct?
One state.
One city.
No.
Or
One system.
One system.
Yeah, right, well, it's true. I mean, it's true that most systems, when they're faced with a limited resource environment, is the service gets spread out. It doesn't get concentrated, just because of the demand from the public to, you know, I want a piece. You know, so that's why most systems look more peanut butter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No action to take on this, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of reiterate what Councilman Newton said. I think that this new revenue should not be a footnote to what we're talking about with the Greenlight program. I think people should be very aware of what would happen if we don't get our increase. I think it's very important that people understand what the implications are of turning the referendum down.
On that note, I know we talked a little bit about that at the planning committee, and there's kind of two schools of thought, and somehow I think we sort of think there's somewhere in the middle. Because we were asking that question, when we go out and do the Greenlight process, are we telling people this? What we don't want to do is be in like scare tactic mode and lead with a negative. What we do want to do is lead with the positive and talk about all the positive things that a robust transportation system brings in all the various ways, economic development, all of that. But that it should be mentioned in some way that, again, not the lead, not a scare tactic, but that, you know, we're not only just looking for a robust system, but we also have to sustain the system we have, and we can't do it. With some mention to it, but not being the way of trying to convince people. We don't want to be in that business, so.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Next item